The Galactic Empire had arrived, its warships gleaming under the distant light of an unfamiliar star. They had conquered dozens of species, crushed rebellions, and absorbed entire civilizations into their dominion. To them, this was just another routine encounter, another lesser race to bring to heel. Yet, what they found waiting for them was something unexpected. On the far side of the system, the human ships floated in perfect formation. They were smaller than the Empire's towering dreadnoughts, lacking the elaborate designs and ornate gold plating that marked Imperial vessels. Compared to the overwhelming presence of the Galactic fleet, they seemed almost insignificant. But then, something strange happened. The human ships didn't respond with the usual fear or desperate attempts at diplomacy. There were no panic-stricken messages begging for mercy. Instead, a signal was broadcast across the void: laughter. It started as a chuckle, then grew into a chorus of uncontrollable amusement. The humans were laughing. Not nervous, not afraid, just laughing. The Empire's admirals, seasoned in the art of war, were baffled. Had something gone wrong with their communications? Was this some kind of bizarre human ritual? They sent a demand for explanation, their message stern and absolute. This system is now under the control of the Galactic Empire. Surrender your ships and acknowledge Imperial rule. The laughter only grew louder. On board one of the human vessels, the crew struggled to contain themselves. The moment they had seen the Empire's ships, the reaction had been the same across every human vessel in the fleet. It was impossible not to laugh. The towering warships, covered in decorative filigree and unnecessarily massive extensions, looked more like parade floats than functional military vessels. The Empire had built its ships like relics from a forgotten past, weighed down by pointless extravagance. Meanwhile, human ships were built for efficiency, speed, and pure function battle, tested in the harshest environments space had to offer. One of the human captains finally managed to respond between fits of laughter. "Wait, is this real? Are those your warships?" His voice dripped with amusement, barely suppressing another chuckle. The bridge crew struggled to keep straight faces, and across the fleet, similar reactions played out. They weren't just laughing at the design. Everything about the Empire's fleet seemed outdated, inefficient. These weren't warriors standing at the gates of human space. They were relics from a time that had long passed. The Empire, for all its might, had just made a mistake. They had assumed humanity was like every other species they had encountered, awed by size, intimidated by grandeur. But humans had seen war in its most brutal, most practical form. And if there was one thing humans knew better than anyone else, it was how to fight. As the laughter finally faded, a different sound took its place, an alert flashing across every human vessel. The Empire was charging weapons. The mood shifted in an instant. Amusement turned to cold calculation. The humans weren't afraid. They'd already decided how this would end. A single command echoed across the human fleet. "Let's show them what a real warship looks like." The moment the Empire's weapons powered up, the mood inside the human fleet shifted. The laughter was gone. Jokes had their time, but now it was all business. In every control room, on every bridge, across every ship, crews moved with quiet precision. These weren't civilians thrown into battle. They were professionals, veterans. The Empire, for all its arrogance, didn't realize what it had walked into. Humanity had learned the hard way that space was unforgiving. Their ships weren't built for show, they were built for survival. No decorative spires, no gilded insignias, just armor, weapons, and raw power. While the Empire had spent centuries parading their dominance, humanity had been fighting wars in the cold void, perfecting the art of space combat. Now, all that experience was about to be tested. Aboard the Empire's flagship, the High Admiral watched the human fleet with a mixture of irritation and confusion. This wasn't the reaction he was used to. Normally, species either groveled at the first sight of Imperial warships or lashed out in a desperate, futile attack. These humans had done neither. First, they laughed. Now, they were waiting, studying. He narrowed his eyes. The human vessels lacked the overwhelming bulk of Imperial warships, but there was something unsettling about them. The designs were unfamiliar, sleek yet reinforced in ways he didn't quite understand. They lacked the elegant, sweeping curves of imperial engineering, yet they radiated an undeniable efficiency. There was no wasted space, no unnecessary mass. Every component had a purpose. He dismissed his unease with a wave of his hand. It didn't matter. The Empire had crushed fleets far larger than this before. "Let them watch," he muttered. "Fire the warning shot." A pulse of energy surged through the void. A single beam, perfectly aimed, designed to cripple rather than destroy. It was the Empire's way of asserting dominance, showing their enemies the power they wielded before demanding surrender. It had worked every time before. But this time was different. Before the beam could even reach its target, the human ship flickered one moment there, the next moment gone. The Imperial officers barely had time to react before alarms blared across the fleet. The humans had moved. Fast. Faster than any ship should be able to. The High Admiral's eyes widened. Where did they go? A cold, precise voice cut through the Empire's open comms. Too slow. Then the first human ship reappeared directly behind one of the Empire's destroyers. A second later, another human vessel vanished from its original position, materializing near the flagship itself. Panic spread across the Imperial fleet. Their targeting systems struggled to keep up, recalibrating over and over as human ships darted in and out of view. It wasn't cloaking technology, there was no energy signature to suggest that. It was something else entirely. Something the Empire had never encountered before. For the first time in centuries, an Imperial admiral felt something he never thought possible. A flicker of doubt. Then a new transmission came through from the human fleet. The voice was calm, almost amused. "You might want to rethink this fight." The Imperial officers scrambled to react, but their hands hesitated over their controls. This wasn't how battles were supposed to unfold. The Empire dictated the terms. The Empire made demands. The Empire was never the one caught off guard. And yet, in the vast emptiness of space, their towering warships suddenly felt small. The High Admiral clenched his jaw. He had fought countless wars, crushed rebellions before they could begin, reduced entire planets to dust. But in all that time, he had never encountered an enemy that didn't respond with fear or desperation. These humans, however, were something else entirely. They weren't panicking. They weren't retreating. They were waiting, calculating. And worst of all, they were enjoying this. Aboard one of the human vessels, the crew watched their sensors, tracking every slow, clumsy movement of the Imperial fleet. The humans didn't need to fire a single shot to know how this would play out. They'd already won in the way that mattered most. The Empire was rattled. The fleet that had crushed species after species was now second-guessing its every move. One of the human officers smirked. "They still think size matters." The captain didn't take his eyes off the display. "Let them." A new transmission came through from the Imperial flagship, this time laced with barely concealed frustration. "Human fleet, your tactics will not save you. Your evasive maneuvers are clever, but they will not last. You are outnumbered, outgunned. Surrender, and we will be merciful." Silence followed. A beat too long. The Imperial bridge crew exchanged uneasy glances. Had the humans finally realized the hopelessness of their situation? Had they finally accepted their fate? Then the response came. Low at first. A soft chuckle over the open channel. Then more laughter, not forced, not mocking, just pure, uncontrollable amusement. It echoed across the fleet, reaching every Imperial vessel, spreading like wildfire through the comms. The High Admiral's fists curled into the armrests of his throne. Enough. The Empire didn't deal with uncertainty. They ruled through fear. They erased defiance before it had a chance to spread. And these humans, these laughing creatures, were a threat unlike any they had faced before. The doubt in his officer's eyes was unacceptable. With a single command, the Imperial fleet fired. Hundreds of energy blasts tore through the void, each one carefully calculated, each one set to overwhelm. And yet, nothing hit. The human ships were already gone, slipping through the barrage with impossible speed. The sensors struggled to track them. Imperial officers shouted commands, recalibrating, chasing ghosts. But every time they thought they had a lock, the humans weren't there anymore. Then the human fleet reappeared. Closer. Too close. Right where the Empire never expected them to be. A single voice cut through the chaos. Calm. Steady. Unshaken. Now it's our turn. The Imperial fleet had never been on the receiving end of confusion before. Their battles were usually straightforward, overwhelming firepower crushing resistance before it could even begin. Yet now, as their weapons fired into empty space, as their targeting systems scrambled to catch up, the reality was sinking in. They weren't in control of this battle. The humans were. On the Imperial flagship, the High Admiral forced himself to remain still. His officers whispered among themselves, their voices edged with something that had no place on an Imperial warship: fear. It was unspoken, but it was there, hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. He knew that if he didn't regain control soon, it wouldn't just be this battle at risk. It would be the Empire's reputation. A sudden alert snapped his attention back to the battlefield. The human ships had reappeared, this time within striking distance of the Imperial dreadnoughts. But they weren't firing. They were waiting. Studying. It was as if they wanted to see how the Empire would react, like a predator testing its prey before the kill. The silence was unbearable. The High Admiral forced his voice to remain steady as he gave the next command. All ships, form a defensive line. Focus fire on their lead vessels. But even as the order was given, it was already too late. The human fleet moved again, splitting into smaller formations, darting between the massive Imperial warships with impossible speed. They weren't just avoiding fire. They were positioning themselves, circling, closing in. It wasn't a battle anymore. It was a hunt. Aboard one of the human ships, the captain watched the Imperial fleet struggle to react. They had expected humans to fight like everyone else the Empire had encountered: slow, predictable, desperate. Instead, the Empire was facing something it had never prepared for. A force that didn't just fight better, but thought differently. One of the human officers let out a low whistle. They still think they can win this. The captain didn't look away from the display. They don't know they've already lost. The High Admiral's voice cut through the fleet-wide comms, his anger barely restrained. Human fleet, you will not win this battle. The Empire will not fall to tricks and illusions. Surrender now, and your people may be spared. The response was instant. A single human transmission, clear and deliberate. We were hoping you'd say that. Before the Admiral could process the meaning, his ship jolted violently. Alarms blared as emergency lights flickered across the bridge. The Imperial officers scrambled for control, their faces pale with disbelief. The humans hadn't just attacked, they had disabled key systems in a single calculated strike. Shields flickered, weapons fell silent. And through the massive windows of the bridge, the High Admiral could see it. The human fleet was no longer just circling. They were closing in. The trap had been set. The Empire had walked straight into it. The Imperial flagship trembled under the weight of its own failing systems. Officers scrambled, shouting over each other, trying to regain control, but it was useless. The energy grids were flickering, weapons were offline, and shields were barely holding. The mighty fleet of the Galactic Empire, once feared across the stars, was now helpless, surrounded by a force they had underestimated from the start. The High Admiral gritted his teeth, staring at the chaos unfolding across his ship. This was impossible. This was not how battles were supposed to go. The Empire didn't lose. It didn't falter. And yet, in the cold, unforgiving void, surrounded by human ships that moved faster than his eyes could track, he felt something he hadn't felt in his entire career. Defeat. A final transmission came through the Imperial comms, cutting through the alarms and panicked voices like a blade. You had your chance, the human voice said, calm as ever. Now you have a choice. Leave. Go back to your empire. And remember this moment. The High Admiral's jaw locked. His pride screamed at him to fight, to push forward, to refuse. But even he knew the truth now. His fleet was outmatched. His men were terrified. And if he pushed any further, they wouldn't just lose, they would be erased. He took a slow breath, forcing the words out. All Imperial ships stand down. Silence filled the bridge. For a moment, no one moved, as if refusing to believe the order had actually been given. But the humans didn't fire. They didn't taunt. They simply waited. And one by one, the Imperial warships powered down their weapons, signaling their surrender not in words, but in action. Aboard the human flagship, the captain exhaled, watching the once mighty fleet dim its engines and retreat into the darkness of space. One of the officers shook their head with a smirk. They thought they could intimidate us. They thought wrong, the captain replied. But there was no celebration. No cheering or victory speeches. Just quiet understanding. Humanity had won, but not because of superior numbers or overwhelming firepower. They had won because they refused to play by the Empire's rules. Because while the Empire had spent centuries perfecting war, humanity had mastered something even more dangerous. Adaptation. As the last Imperial ship disappeared into the void, the human fleet held position, their victory undeniable. The message had been sent. The Empire now knew. Humanity wasn't just another species to be conquered. They were something else entirely. Something the galaxy would never forget. And as the stars stretched endlessly before them, humanity moved forward not as conquerors, not as victims, but as something far more powerful. A force that no empire could ever hope to control.